Welcome back. This is the fourth episode of my Ancient Mythology series, and the first of the Latin American episodes. I had almost forgotten about Latin America and was very pleased when I accidentally found my old script. I know I said in the last episode that I would be doing ancient Roman mythology and then Norse, but as you can tell, those will have to come after this episode instead. Other than that, we are on track, and we will be back to Egyptian mythology in only 2 episodes. If you are a subscriber to the channel, you have probably figured out that I will also occasionally sprinkle in my usual videos here and there. I would like to take this opportunity to give a big thank you to everyone who has subscribed. I am so grateful for all of you. This is a passion project of mine. It's purely recreational and something I do in my spare time for fun. I never would have thought that so many people would actually like my videos. Having 140 subscribers seems absolutely wild to me. In my mind, that many subscribers was years into the future, if I were lucky. So yeah, thank you all very, very much. I appreciate you all, and I hope you enjoy this video about ancient mythology. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing, and as always, please leave a like if you enjoyed your time here, but only if you really want to, of course. I would, however, appreciate it a lot. Myths from the New World. The Central and South American continent, which begins north of the equator and stretches all the way down to the cold South Atlantic, displays many different types of landscapes. Along the west coast runs the mountain range of the Andes, a part of the upheaval in the Earth's crust that stretches from Alaska down to Tierra del Fuego, which translates roughly to the Firelands. Several of the mountains are active volcanoes, and even if the lower slopes and valleys are often overgrown with a dense forest, the highest peaks are snow-covered year-round. East of the mountain range lie the tropical rainforests around the large rivers Orinoco and the Amazon River, as well as the high-altitude savannas in southern Brazil and western Bolivia. Further south lie Gran Chaco's thorny jungles and the Pampas, the vast steppes in Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina. The deserts, the cold plateaus, and the stormy coasts at the continent's southern tip contribute further to the landscape's multifaceted character in this area. Central and South America's original inhabitants likely migrated, like North America's Indians, from Asia about 25,000 years ago, and eventually reached the cold Southland, where they settled about 10,000 years ago. When the first Europeans came at the beginning of the 1500s, they found a whole range of different, well-established cultures. The people who lived in the forests and along the rivers lived close to nature and had a deep sense of belonging with their surroundings. They were thus very different from their conquerors who belonged in Europe's urban landscapes, which is why they were immediately regarded as primitive. The peoples from the plateaus, the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Inca Indians, who had built large cities and empires, appeared as significantly more advanced. To get at all the gold and silver and the precious stones that the Europeans saw everywhere, they oppressed the Indians and made them into slaves. Soon they were followed by more peaceful settlers who began to farm the land and exploit the forest's riches. Later, African slaves were imported as servants and labor. In some areas, the settlers lived in peace with the Indians, but in other places, many Indian tribes were exterminated, either through methodical persecution or because of European diseases, which the Indians had no resistance against. From this mixture of races and tribes, stories stream toward us as if from a never-ending treasure chest. There are the Indian stories, a rich variation of tales in different languages and from different cultures. There are the European tales, which were told among the settlers from Spain, Italy, Portugal, Germany, France, England, and many other countries. And there are tales that make a mixture of Indian and European or Indian and African sources. The stories in this video originate for the most part from Indian sources and can be divided into 3 different categories. First, we have the legends of the Aztec, Mayan, and Inca Indian empires, stories that when they were written down were more like historical accounts than tales. These we have mainly received from 15 and 1600s Spanish and Portuguese historians, who, even if they distanced themselves from what they called devilish ideas, still passed on what the people themselves perceived as their history. As number 2 come the myths that have been collected in modern times through more scientific and less prejudiced methods. These stories are not so often about gods and emperors, but more about the emergence of everyday things, such as how to make fire, cook, or honey. They reveal an intimate feeling of belonging with the forest and the rivers, and a desire to learn to live in harmony with nature, rather than to conquer and win dominion over it. In the third place, we have the legends and myths that belong neither to the first nor second category, but are influenced by non-Indian ways of thinking or storytelling traditions. Whenever different peoples mix with each other, a fusion of myths from different cultures occurs, and these stories are neither less interesting nor less authentic than the first two categories. The legends and myths often have a deeper message, and the actions of the gods and heroes are influenced by what is regarded as good behavior or accepted practice. The heroes and villains in these stories represent different soul qualities and give life to abstract ideas in a way that people have found easy to understand. Their adventures symbolize the desires, ideals, concerns, and problems of ordinary people. Ultimately, this entire diversity of legends and myths, even if it sometimes contains real historical events, is nothing other than a picture of the human mind itself. In many stories, from all parts of this area, the hero figures are animals, and the first thing that strikes us is that they often have excellent human character traits, both good and bad. Frogs can be skilled hunters. Foxes and hares are usually clever and cunning. Jaguars are powerful, but not always so intelligent. But just as often, the animals were regarded as supernatural and divine, since it was believed that the gods originally appeared in animal form. The invisible spirits represented by the animals were adopted by different tribes in the form of totem poles or other objects with special meaning. In a tribe whose totem pole or god statue is, for example, a frog, the medicine man or shaman, who is the tribe's spiritual leader, must dress up as a frog and practically be a frog while he performs his tribe's sacred rites. In another tribe, the shaman may have his body painted spotted to resemble a jaguar. Even if a tribe abandons the very basic idea behind the totem pole, the animal figures of the totem pole remain to a high degree alive in their myths. Another important notion that permeates all Indian thinking is animism, which means that all soulless objects, plants, or dead things have a living soul. Clouds, stones, or clay figures can be regarded as gods, not just because they symbolize a supernatural being, but because they actually resemble the one they represent. This perception that you become what you resemble also applies to humans, especially shamans. When a shaman paints his body to resemble a jaguar, he feels that he is filled by the jaguar's living soul, and thus also by the animal's supernatural powers, both for himself and for his spectators. His usual human self seems to die away, and he is reborn in a jaguar guise, and can in that way help his tribe. This perception of rebirth into a new, spiritual form recurs again and again in the Central and South American tales, all the way from the sophisticated legends of the Aztecs and Incas down to the beliefs that prevail even today among the descendants of the forest tribes. The pattern that lies at the foundation of the Indians' belief has not changed through the centuries. The gods of the Aztecs. Fertile land has always attracted settlers, and the Valley of Mexico is no exception. It is a nearly 5,000 square kilometers large valley basin in a volcanic mountain range and lies between 2,100 and 2,400 meters above sea level. It was once a shallow lake and was the center for a series of Indian civilizations dating back to about 2000 BC. It was here that the Spanish conquerors in 1519 came into contact with the Aztec Empire, a highly developed society with practical and artistic skills that made the Spaniards both amazed and impressed. The most significant of the older civilizations was that of the Olmecs, who lived roughly around 800 to 400 BCE, But the culture that had a more direct influence on the Aztecs was the magnificent civilization usually called the Classical Age, which had its center in Teotihuacan and lasted from 300 to 600 AD. And by the way, I do apologize for my grave mispronunciation of any and all names. Please forgive me for not being able to pronounce these words properly. Please bear in mind that, for starters, English isn't my native language. Trying to pronounce both proper English and these Spanish/ancient indigenous names can sometimes be a real challenge for me. Teotihuacan itself was a large city whose temples and enormous sun and moon pyramids remains even in today. The city ruled over most Indian tribes in the central parts of the Mexican highlands. It seems to have been a time characterized by peace and prosperity, for no fortifications have been found, and there is nothing to suggest that any wars occurred. Some of the gods worshipped by the inhabitants of Teotihuacan were well known even to the Aztecs. The Feathered Serpent, later known as Quetzalcoatl or Quetzalcoatl, or perhaps pronounced as Quetzalcoatl. Again, I am truly sorry for the pronunciations. I do, for the record, try to search for examples of how to pronounce these names, but it's hard to find examples. The best I can find are long documentaries about, for example, the Aztecs, but then I would have to sit and watch a couple of hours of footage just to hope to find an example of the narrator saying the specific word I'm looking for at the moment. So, in a video like this one, where there will be many different names I'm unsure how to properly pronounce, it would take far too much time. All I can do is try to pronounce the names to the best of my ability. The sun gods and the rain gods were also well known by the Aztecs, but there were no traces of any evil war gods or the human sacrifices that were part of the Aztec religion. Around the year 600, some sort of catastrophe occurred, perhaps an invasion or an economic collapse, and with that, the era of Teotihuacan's greatness was over. The second civilization to influence the Aztecs was the Toltec, whose capital lay in Tula, Tolan, already by 980 AD. They had gained power over a large number of tribes in the area, and their influence stretched even outside the Valley of Mexico to the cultures of the Mixtecs and Zapotecs. The Toltecs were skilled builders and understood both metalworking and ceramics and weaving. Their history, as presented by the Aztecs, differs to a high degree from what today's archaeologists consider to be real facts. In reality, the Toltecs seem to have been a cruel, warlike people who oppressed their opponents ruthlessly. The Aztecs, however, identified their chief Tezcatlipoca with the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, and saw him as a peace-loving man and a kind-hearted leader. According to the Aztec legend, Quetzalcoatl, or in this case, Tezcatlipoca, was challenged by a warlike ethnic group, whose tribal god was the malevolent Tezcatlipoca, or smoking mirror. The battle between these two ethnic groups, which is portrayed as a struggle between the gods themselves, means the end for Tolan and the Toltecs' power. Whatever the cause may have been, the Toltec kingdom seems to have collapsed sometime between 1156 and 1168 AD. In the West, the Zapotec and Mixtec cultures continued to flourish. The Zapotecs lived in the vicinity of the current city of Oaxaca. Ruins after their large temple pyramids still remain on the flat plateau high up on Monte Alban. They were skilled in smithing and pottery, and it was they who built the place of the dead, Mitla, where the chiefs were buried in magnificent graves, and where there was a large temple of stone, whose walls were adorned with frescoes and intricate mosaic patterns. The Mixtecs, whose history can be traced back to 692 AD, lived between Pueblo and Oaxaca. Among the objects that have been preserved from their time are vividly decorated scripts made of bark or deer hide. Thereafter, a number of smaller free states were established in the Valley of Mexico. The last group that came to this area were the Aztecs themselves, whose name means the people whose faces no one knew. They came from the northwest and brought with them their tribal god Huitzilopochtli and the custom of human sacrifice, something they believed appeased the tribal god. They were skilled warriors and soon won a reputation for being useful mercenaries. But there is hardly any doubt that the other peoples in the Valley of Mexico regarded them as barbaric and uncivilized. For a long time, the Aztecs lived as parasites and took temporary jobs where they could find them, while they made raids into villages and other communities where they kidnapped both goods and women alike. They were often driven away from their settlements by angry peasants and townspeople who were used to more civilized behavior. Eventually, they settled on two marshy islands in the valley of Mexico's large lake, and around the year 1320, they founded the city of Tenochtitlan, the city that would later become the center of their empire. Because the Aztecs had been a wandering people, they had gradually adopted the culture of the lands where they worked. They had adopted their language, customs, and practices. When they grew strong and began to conquer their former masters, they regarded themselves as successors to the magnificent Toltec culture, and by simply rewriting their own history, they began to see themselves as the true descendants of the Toltecs, and the Toltec era came to be regarded as a kind of golden age where peace and prosperity reigned. By the year 1500, the Aztecs had conquered a very large area in central Mexico and founded a socially and politically powerful society. They used a kind of picture script, had their own mathematical system, and used an intricate calendar to keep track of days and months. Their language, Nahuatl, was used by many tribes in the Valley of Mexico and is today the indigenous language in Mexico. The Aztecs' religion was a fusion of belief systems from many different tribes, with gods and goddesses who ruled over different areas of life. Among the most important gods is Tlaloc, the rain god, to whom children were sacrificed. Tezcatlipoca, the fire god and ruler of all volcanoes. Tezcatlipoca, the sun and war god. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, and his great rival Tezcatlipoca, who was identified with night and death, as well as prophecy and magic. Tezcatli, the ruler of the underworld, reigned in Mictlan, which was the kingdom of the dead. Most souls traveled after death through a series of different planes of existence down to the ninth hell, where they reached the eternal dwelling of the dead. Certain more fortunate beings had the luck to reach a heavenly paradise with the rain god, while warriors who died in battle, those who were sacrificed, and women who died in childbirth were given a new life in the kingdom of the sun. The Aztec Empire collapsed in 1521 after 2 years of struggle against the Spanish conquerors. Their last emperor, Montezuma II, was more of a philosopher than a warrior king, and he lived a life in splendor and luxury that by far surpassed his predecessors. His brave warriors were not sufficiently well equipped for a war against the conquistadors, who had both horses and guns, and despite certain initial successes, the Aztecs were eventually defeated. But Montezuma himself was not forgotten. His name, like the names of the rulers who had existed in Tollan before him, lived on in legend, and he too became a part of the Mexican Indians' mythology. The Five Suns. According to the Aztecs, the history of the earth was divided into 5 different ages, or 5 suns. There are many different versions of the legend of the suns. Some believe that the first age took place in a world that was completely dark, where there were only animals that roamed around in the gloomy places where life was at all possible. If any humans were born, they were immediately devoured by wildcats or ocelots. These animals were so powerful that this time was also called the Age of the Wildcat. Gradually, a number of humans managed to survive because the ocelots could not eat them all. But when the Age of the Wildcat was over, these people were transformed into monkeys. Most legends agree that the first 4 suns were named after the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Although some legends also speak of the ages of famine. During each age, new living beings were created, but all epochs ended with a catastrophe. The Earth Sun, which according to some was also the age of the giants, ended during violent earthquakes when entire mountains collapsed into the sea. The Fire Sun ended in a rain of molten lava and raging fires that consumed the entire Earth. The only living beings that managed to escape this horrific catastrophe were the birds, and some humans who could transform themselves into birds and fly away from the danger. The air sun perished in hurricanes and typhoons that swept away trees and buildings, and even stones and boulders. The water sun ended with a great flood that drowned all living things except the fish and 2 human beings, Tata and Nina. One day when Tata and Nina were busy working out in the fields, the water sun had them call to him. "I shall let a great tidal wave overflow the whole earth," he said, "and it will drown all living creatures. But you two shall survive." "But how shall we be able to manage when the tidal wave comes, O holy water sun?" asked Nana. "You shall find a sturdy tree in the forest," answered the water sun, "and make a hollow in the trunk, exactly as if you were monkeys who were going to hide yourselves. See to it that the hollow lies high above the ground, near the top of the tree. Then crawl in and stay there until the water has subsided. But remember, when you come down to the ground again, you must not be greedy, but only take what you need. You may take 1 corn cob each, no more." The man and the woman ran off and searched for the largest tree in the forest, a fine old tree that was several hundred years old, and so tall that it seemed to reach all the way to heaven. They climbed up along the thick trunk, and up there among the branches in the tree crown, they found a place where the trunk was already hollowed out. There was plenty of room for both of them, so they settled in and made themselves comfortable and sat down to wait. Then came the flood. The water rose higher and swept everything in its path as it thundered across the earth. Tata and Nina sat safe in their hollow and watched it all. The floating branches, the trees that had been uprooted, cooking pots and tools from the farms, and all the animals and humans being carried away by the masses of water. After what seemed like an eternity, the water subsided. The 2 humans crawled out of their hollow in the tree and climbed carefully down the thick tree that all the while had stood firmly rooted in the ground. By this time they had become hungry, and when they saw a fish come swimming in a stream where the water still stood high after the flood, they completely forgot what the water sun had said. "Come, let's take it," said Tata, and they caught the fish, built a fire of twigs, and began to grill it. The smoke from the fire curled up between the branches of the tree, and a thin pillar of smoke rose straight up into the sky. The water sun discovered the smoke and peeked down to see what they were up to. "Why did you not obey me?" he thundered. "I told you to only take 1 corn cob." He took a thick stick and struck them both on the head with it. Then he removed the part of their brains that made humans equal to the gods and transformed them into dogs. The age of the water sun was over. The 5th son was born in Teotihuacan, the holy city where the Great Sun Pyramid was later built. The 5th son brought harmony between the 4 elements and constitutes the age in which we live now. Some call it the age of earthquakes, famine, war, and confusion. Others believe that during the 5th sun, the earth will survive because during this time, a balance prevails between the 4 conflicting elements. But the Aztecs believed that this balance can only be maintained as long as the highest being, namely man, unceasingly continues to strive for goodness and virtue. The new sun. When the ages of the 4th sun were over, there was no longer any light in the world. And without light, nothing could grow. Plants could not thrive, humans could not live, and no animals could see to follow their paths through the forests. Then the gods gathered to discuss what they should do. Finally, they agreed that a small god with a sickly spotted complexion, who no one had much faith in, should be given the task of creating light in the world. "You, Nanahuatzin, may you undertake to find the light and create the sun, and thus the heat and warmth that keeps the humankind alive," they said. Nanahuatzin found himself humble in his role, but at the same time another, quite boastful god offered to help too, in the hope of being honored and praised. His name was Tezcatlipoca, the shell bead god. Before something as significant as creating a new sun, the gods had to prepare themselves. Nanahuatzin and Tezcatlipoca spent 4 days fasting and doing penance for their previous misdeeds. In this way, they would be cleansed of every evil thought that could affect their work of creation. When both gods had fasted, they lit a fire and made sacrifices before it. Tezcatlipoca's sacrificial gifts were magnificent. There were finely crafted flint axes, shimmering feathers from holy birds, gold nuggets, and precious stones. Poor Nanahuatzin had only simple objects to offer, but he did as well as he could: green leaves from grass and reeds that he had tied together into 3 small bouquets, thorns that he had stained with his own blood, and even the scabs from his own sores. All the other gods laughed at this contrast and thought that Tezcatlipoca's sacrificial gifts were much more impressive than Nanahuatzin's. Then the great hour was at hand. Precisely at midnight, when the dark world was at its very darkest, the 2 gods met before a large fire. Tezcatlipoca had dressed in beautiful, magnificent clothes. Nanahuatzin had a paper-like suit that was made of bark. Their task was now to sacrifice themselves so as to create the sun that would grant light to the world. First, Tezcatlipoca went forward to the fire, but as soon as he felt the burning heat, he recoiled. He tried again, but again he withdrew. 4 times he tried, but still could not manage to throw himself into the flames. Then Nanahuatzin went, small and humble as he was. Without hesitation he went forward towards the fire and disappeared among the flames. Then Tezcatlipoca felt so ashamed that he threw himself headlong after him into the fire. While the gods stood there and praised Nanahuatzin's courage, a great glow spread across the sky and the little sickly god rose out of the fire. He had been transformed into the sun itself. Immediately after, Tezcatlipoca also appeared as the moon, which at the time shone just as brightly as the sun. The others laughed at the boastful god who had thrown himself into the fire only because he was ashamed, and they threw a rabbit right in his face to dim his light to a pale reflection of the sun's brilliance. Even today, one can see the rabbit-shaped spots on the moon's surface. The new sun and the moon hung motionless in the void, and to set them in motion in their orbits across the celestial vault, the other gods decided that they too should sacrifice themselves. One after another they threw themselves into the flames. That is to say, everyone except Quetzalcoatl, who was the twin brother of the great Quetzalcoatl himself. He was so afraid that he incessantly transformed himself and took various forms, until he was finally caught and thrown into the fire by force. When Quetzalcoatl came out of the flames again, he had become the god of magic and sorcery, who had the ability to transform himself into whatever he wished. But the sun and the moon still hung motionless in the sky, so Quetzalcoatl sent for a strong wind that blew so hard that it forced first the sun and then the moon ahead across the vault of heaven. Thus began the age of the 5th sun. Sacrifices were an important part of the Aztec religion, but the human sacrifices that caused such revulsion among the first European visitors did not always consist of prisoners or slaves. During the great spring festival held in honor of the god Tezcatlipoca, it may well have been that a lone youth who had been chosen the year before allowed himself to be sacrificed voluntarily. During most of the year, this youth was treated with great respect. He was dressed in fine clothes, was taught to sing and play the flute, and was attended by 8 servants who followed him wherever he went. He was regarded as a god himself. 20 days before the festival, he was dressed in Aztec chieftain's clothes and given 4 beautiful women as wives. For 5 days before the festival itself, he ate and danced unceasingly. On the last day, he and his wives walked out of the city, but the wives left him before he reached the temple where the sacrificial ritual itself would take place. When he had arrived and stepped down the stairs, he broke a flute at every step. He walked up to the stone altar where the priests killed him with a single powerful stroke of a stone knife, after which his heart was handed over to the sun. A new youth was chosen immediately in his place, to be hailed as the reborn god, and in turn be sacrificed the following year. Creation myths. According to the Aztecs' creation stories, the universe was from the beginning only a formless mass, where nothing could live except the gods. There was no light. Everything was shrouded in darkness. One of these stories tells of a godly prince, his beloved wife, and their child. The family lived in a cave when the child, to the parents' great grief, suddenly died. They buried him carefully in the earth, and from his hair cotton began to grow. From his ears grew grain. From his nostrils a fragrant herb that dampens fever. From his fingers grew sweet potatoes. and from his nails corn. Now that there was food, it was not long before man made his entry into the world. But despite having access to all the earth's plants and fruits, he could not yet feel anything for his fellow human beings, but thought only of his own survival. Another story tells of how the grapevine first came to earth. The wind god Tezcatlipoca, who was actually the great god Quetzalcoatl in another guise, fell in love with a girl named Nanahuatzin. She lived in the god's abode, where she was guarded by an old woman named Tezcatlipoca. One day, when everyone in the house lay and slept, Tezcatlipoca came on a visit. He woke the girl carefully, and they snuck silently away, so as not to wake her guardians. They went down to earth, and in the same moment their feet touched the ground. They grew together into a large tree with two powerful branches, one of which belonged to the wind god, and the other to Nanahuatzin. On Tezcatl's branch, there soon grew fresh, green leaves, and immediately Nanahuatz's branch was covered with beautiful flowers. When Tezcatlipoca woke up and discovered that her ward was gone, she became furious. She took a group of young gods with her and hurried down to earth to punish the runaways. She was firmly determined to find them, and it did not take long before she found the tree and recognized Nanahuatz's personality in the blooming branch. She was so furious that she commanded the lightning to strike the tree and separate the two branches from each other. She tore Nanahuatz's branch to herself and tore it into small pieces and handed them over to the young gods, who stamped on them, tore them with their teeth, and chewed them into small crumbs. But the branch that belonged to Tezcatlipoca they did not care about. When Tezcatlipoca and her young gods had returned to the god's abode, the wind god Tezcatlipoca transformed back into his usual form. Sorrowfully, he went over the ground where the gods had scattered the remains of Nanahuatz's branch. While he walked there and mourned his beloved, he saw that the wood splinters had transformed into bones, and he collected them and buried them carefully out in the field. From these bones, the first grapevine shoots sprouted. They bloomed as richly as Nanahuatz's branch had done, and soon after, the sweet grapes were born that humans learned to make wine from. Both of these tales have to do with the earth's vegetation. But there is another, more ominous story that not only deals with creation, but also with the Aztec custom of sacrificing humans. It is told that in the beginning of time, there was nothing but water. In the water swam a monster with many mouths. The two gods, Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, decided that this horrific beast should constitute the foundation of the universe, which at the time was completely without form and shape. So the two gods caught the monster. One held firm its right front leg and left back leg, while the other took the right front leg and left back leg. They fought day and night with the animal until it finally gave up. When it was exhausted and could no longer fight, the two gods tore the monster into two pieces. From the lower body, they created the heavens, and from the upper body, the earth. Its hair became grass and trees. Out of the skin flowers grew. The eyes transformed into caves and springs, and the nose became mountains and valleys. At night, one could hear the great earth monster's hungry roars, when it screamed for human hearts to eat and human blood to quench its thirst. Therefore, one had to constantly sacrifice to it, and the Aztecs killed their enemies to ensure it got the blood it demanded. Another story explained the Aztecs' social structure and the emergence of the warrior class that dominated the Aztec society before the Spanish conquest. In ancient times, there were two gods, Ometeotl and his wife, Omecihuetl. One day, Omecihuetl gave birth, not to a child, but to a stone knife, which she threw down to earth. Immediately, 1,600 warriors shot up from the earth, all equally brave and strong. But because they were very proud by nature, and furthermore entirely alone on earth, they asked their mother to create a servant folk who could take care of them. "Such thoughts do not befit noble men," answered Omecihuetl, "but are typical for arrogant and self-absorbed warriors who have nothing else in their heads than their own wishes. Think again. Is there nothing more in life than to satisfy one's hunger and thirst? You have a place among the gods, if you only can raise your thoughts above that which is earthly." "It brings us no joy," answered the warrior's leader. Soldiers are hard men. We cannot devote ourselves to discussing religion and philosophy. We love this earth. We love the grapevine and what it gives us. We love the food and we love the sun. The only thing we need now are servants who can wait on us and bring food and drink when we command. But Nanahuatzin would not listen to them. So the 1,600 warriors instead turned to the ruler of the underworld, Tezcatlipoca, who sat and brooded in the darkness in Mictlan, the underworld. "Listen here," said the warriors. "Many people have had to lose their lives because of natural disasters during the recent ages. There have been floods and horrific fires, lightning and thunder, hurricanes and whirlwinds, earthquakes and famine. Do you have any ashes from the dead, or perhaps even bones that we could use?" The warriors said nothing, but they believed that if they shed their own blood over a bone or a heap of human ash, the remains would gain new life again. In that way, they would be able to create a man and a woman who could populate the whole earth and found a race of people who could become their servants. "Send a man here who can carry such a bone," said the god of the underworld. None of the heroes was strong enough to make his way into the kingdom of Mictlan, so they asked Solotl, who was the god of magic and twin brother of Quetzalcoatl, to do it for them. In the kingdom of the dead, it was dark and smoky, like the interior of a volcano. Carefully, Solotl approached Tezcatlipoca and his wife Nanahuatzin, who ruled over the souls of the dead. "I have come to fetch the human bones up to the earth," he said. "It is a dangerous mission," replied Tezcatlipoca seriously. "These people lost their lives because they once upon a time defied the gods. Do you really want to risk it happening again?" "It is a risk we are prepared to take," said Solotl, and tried to sound convincing. "Give me the bones." The god of the underworld reached out a leg bone toward him, and quick as lightning, the god of magic snatched the bone and began to run as fast as he could along the stony path that led back to the earth. "Return the bone," shouted Tezcatlipoca, who had regretted it, but it was already too late. But Axolotl ran so fast that he did not see where he placed his feet, so he stumbled and fell in the darkness. The precious leg bone was thrown to the ground and broke into two pieces, one larger and one smaller. Axolotl picked up the pieces and continued. Now and then he stumbled, but he used his magical power and managed to escape the enraged Tezcatlipoca. Finally, he was out with the 1,600 warriors who had just sat and enjoyed a festive meal. "I made it," he gasped. "Here are the bones." The warriors gathered around him, and one by one they cut themselves in the arms with their daggers and sprinkled a few drops of their own blood over the bone pieces. A few days later, a baby boy grew out of the larger bone piece, and after a few more days, a girl from the smaller one. The warriors fed the children milk from a thistle, and it did not take long before they had become fully grown. It became as the warriors had intended. The reborn humans became their servants, and their children and grandchildren became in turn servants to future generations of warriors. The tale of Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent, was likely the most significant of all the Aztec gods. In his many different guises, he was both a sky and sun god, a wind god, the morning star, and a benefactor of humanity. His name comes from Quetzal, a rare bird with unusually long green tail feathers, and Coatl, which means snake. He was worshipped under different names throughout Mexico and Central America, and the highest pyramid temple in Mexico, located in Quetzalcoatl's holy city of Cholula, was dedicated to him, as was a circular temple in the large courtyard in Tenochtitlan. Quetzalcoatl was the son of the earth goddess Coatlicue. One day, when she was out on a mountain slope together with her sisters to do penance, a white feather came floating down from the sky toward her. She caught the feather and placed it against her breast, and in that way, she became pregnant. When the time was up, she gave birth to her son. Quetzalcoatl grew up and became a kind and friendly boy. He was so kind-hearted that he could hardly pick a flower for fear of hurting it. When people tried to persuade him to offer sacrifices, he refused to carry out blood sacrifices, but offered only bread, flowers, and fragrant oils. But toward himself, he was all the more strict. And when he was to do penance, he used to prick himself with cactus spines until the blood ran. When he became older, he acquired many secret knowledges that he passed on to humanity. He discovered where the corn was hidden. He knew the value of various gemstones, of gold and silver, of colored seashells and feathers, and knew how to benefit from various plants. Quetzalcoatl's goodness and purity angered the great god Tezcatlipoca, the smoldering mirror. Tezcatlipoca was in many ways Quetzalcoatl's direct opposite. It was claimed that he was so light and swift-footed that he could climb down from the sky on a rope twisted from spiderwebs. He was a god of joy, but also had power over sorcery and discord, over prosperity and destruction. An unpredictable trickster who gave life to man, but at the same time demanded that one offer and sacrificed and killed for his sake. One day, Tezcatlipoca came to Quetzalcoatl and held up a mirror before him so that he could see what he looked like. Quetzalcoatl looked and saw to his horror an old wrinkled face with sorrowful sunken eyes. He became afraid that the people would despise him if they saw him in such a state, so he hid his face and ran and hid himself. Tezcatlipoca followed after and persuaded him to look once more. But this time, he had put a precious mantle of Quetzal feathers on him and given him a blue snake mask of real turquoise. Then Quetzalcoatl became calm again and returned to his people. But for Tezcatlipoca, it was not enough to just demonstrate his power. He wanted to put an end to Quetzalcoatl's virtue for good. So he pretended to be kind and invited Quetzalcoatl to a cup of pulque, a kind of wine made from the fermented sap of the agave plant. At first, Quetzalcoatl did not want to drink, but after a while, Tezcatlipoca managed to persuade him to dampen his finger in the cup and taste the wine. The first drop led to a gulp, and then another, and soon he drank eagerly of the wine. He began to become happy in spirit, and went and fetched his sister, and they continued to drink together until both were completely intoxicated. Without knowing what they were actually doing, they fell into each other's arms and made love. For a time, Quetzalcoatl and his sister lived in a blessed intoxication. They had abandoned the pure life and completely forgotten their religious obligations. But gradually they came to their senses and realized the catastrophic nature of their actions. Overwhelmed by feelings of guilt, Quetzalcoatl ordered his servants to build a stone chest, and in it he lay for 4 days and 4 nights to do penance. Thereafter, he told his people to follow him down to the beach. There he erected a large funeral pyre, took once more his mantle of Quetzal feathers and snake mask of turquoise, and threw himself into the fire. The great fire burned all night, and at dawn, Quetzalcoatl's body had transformed into ash that rose up from the flames in the form of a large swarm of birds. While the servants stood helpless and watched their god leave them forever, they discovered a new star that shone with a strong light in the morning sky. Quetzalcoatl's heart had transformed into the morning star. The Aztecs worshipped Quetzalcoatl as a god, but there are other stories about him that show they also regarded him as a historical person. In these stories, he is the wise ruler of Tallinn, the capital of the Toltec kingdom, which collapsed around 990 AD. There were 9 Toltec kings who called themselves Quetzalcoatl, so it is very possible that these legends grew up around a real person. There were also many who believed that he came from a foreign land. When Quetzalcoatl reigned in Tallinn, peace and prosperity prevailed in the land. There was enough food for everyone. In the fields grew cotton in different colors, and there was gold, silver, and gemstones. The inhabitants of Tallinn were skilled craftsmen and established the flourishing state. But a time came when Quetzalcoatl became old and the people became lazy. Then Tezcatlipoca thought it was time to intervene and force Quetzalcoatl to leave his kingdom. Tezcatlipoca dressed himself as an old, white-haired man, set off for Quetzalcoatl's palace, and asked to meet the king. "Your king is sick," he said to the guards, "and I come with medicine so that he shall be well. Lead me to him." Tezcatlipoca was led in, and gave Quetzalcoatl a strong drug. Quetzalcoatl interpreted the old man's presence as a sign that his life was soon at an end, so he asked what he should do. "Go to Tolantlapan," replied Tezcatlipoca. "There you will find an old man who is waiting for you, and he will transform you into a beautiful youth again. Here, drink this medicine, and you will understand everything." Quetzalcoatl was certainly both sick and old, but he was not stupid. He took the medicine but refused to go along with leaving Tallinn, so Tezcatlipoca had to resort to another trick. Once again, he dressed up, this time as a green pepper merchant, and stood in the square outside the palace until he managed to attract the attention of Quetzalcoatl's daughter. She was a well-bred girl and had never had particularly much contact with foreign people. But as soon as she saw this beautiful young man, she became violently and passionately infatuated. She became quite sick with love and spoke to her father, saying that the only man she could ever imagine marrying was the green pepper merchant. If she did not get to marry him, she would rather die. When Quetzalcoatl sent for the young man, the messengers could not find him at first. But just as the messengers were about to give up, he appeared in a strange way in the square again, and was led to the palace. Reluctantly, Quetzalcoatl accepted him as a son-in-law, and Tezcatlipoca gained a large influence at the court. It was quite natural that the marriage between the green pepper merchant and Quetzalcoatl's daughter created envy and loathing among the Toltecs. So to at least partially distract their attention, Quetzalcoatl attacked a neighboring tribe. Now the Toltecs saw their chance to get rid of the young man, but despite being let him fight in the most exposed positions, he fought bravely and returned home in triumph, more self-confident than anyone. The green pepper merchant now began to exercise a hypnotic power over the Toltec people. First, he called them together for a great feast, to which he had invited people from near and far. When the people were assembled, he began to sing and beat a drum, and he told them to sing along and follow him in the dance. They danced as if in a trance to the steady rhythm of the drum, and he led them ever closer to a deep ravine. Faster and faster pounded the drum, faster and faster went the dance, until they, enraptured by the music, lost their balance, stumbled out over the narrow ravine edge, and plunged down into the abyss, where they were transformed into stones. Thereafter, he set upon a group of people who worked in Quetzalcoatl's garden and left hundreds dead behind him among the flowers. And on another occasion, he transformed himself into a sorcerer and attracted such a large crowd of people that many were trampled to death. One catastrophe followed another until the Toltecs realized that the end was near for their kingdom. As a final measure, Tezcatlipoca caused all the food in Tallinn to rot, whereupon he dressed himself as an old woman and began roasting corn. The wonderful scent of fresh corn spread from the old woman's house and lured the rest of the Toltecs to her, and when they arrived, Tezcatlipoca killed them all. Now Quetzalcoatl realized that it was time to depart. Exhausted, he set fire to the city he had built, buried his gold and silver in the valleys among the mountains, transformed the cocoa trees into common cacti, and commanded the colorful birds to fly away. The only people who were still alive and could follow him were his faithful servants, dwarfs and hunchbacks. On his journey, he came to a large tree where he lay down to rest. He asked to have his mirror. Now he saw that he had truly become old and tired. In a fit of powerless rage, he began to throw stones at the tree trunk, and the stones buried themselves so deep in the bark that they could be seen several generations after him. In another place, where he had lain down to rest on a rock, his hands and thighs left imprints in the stone as an eternal reminder that he had been there. Every time someone asked where he was going, he only replied, "I go to learn." The whole time he was on his wanderings, and the whole time he was pursued by his enemy, Tezcatlipoca. In one guise after another, he took from Quetzalcoatl all his knowledge of gold and silversmithing, of feathers, of leatherwork, of sculpting and painting. Up on the cold mountain slopes toward the volcanoes Popocatépetl and Ixtacciohuatl, Popocatépetl, Popol. Oh my effing god. This is insane. Let me try that one more time. Popol and Tezcatlipoca. Anyway, up on those mountains, his followers, his remaining companions, the dwarfs and hunchbacks, froze to death. Quetzalcoatl was now completely alone. Finally, Quetzalcoatl came, lonely and tired, down to the sea. With his last strength, he built a raft of snakes, and with it, he disappeared out over the water. The story of Quetzalcoatl became a reminder that man must leave everything that is earthly to win knowledge of the spiritual world. But it also gained a special significance for the Spanish conquerors in Mexico. The Aztecs believed that Quetzalcoatl would one day return from the sea. This would happen in a year when his birthday fell on a special day, and such a combination occurred in the year 1519. For several years, there had been signs that seemed to foreshadow a supernatural event, and when the Aztec ruler, Montezuma, heard talk of the strange men who stepped ashore on the northern coast, he took it for granted that it was Quetzalcoatl who had returned to take possession of his kingdom. In certain stories, Quetzalcoatl was described as a white man with a beard, something that was unusual among the Aztecs, and he was often depicted with a pointed hat on his head. To the royal messengers, the description of Cortez seemed to match the image of the returning god, and among the gifts that Montezuma sent to welcome him were Quetzalcoatl's turquoise mask, his feather ornaments, and snake-shaped spears. Not until the Spaniards revealed their warlike intentions did the Aztecs realize their tragic mistake. The long migration. Before the Aztecs came to Mexico, they lived significantly further north by the Colorado River, in what today belongs to the USA. Several successive migrations led them eventually southward, and there are many stories describing the migrations of the Indian tribes. The various legends contain several contradictory details. Some of them are certainly real, historical accounts that have been passed down through oral tradition, and which mention different peoples and places that archaeologists have been able to identify. Others are more symbolic and explain moral concepts or the religious faith of the Aztec people. In the following story, the Aztecs' highest god is Huitzilopochtli, which literally means hummingbird from the west or south. Together with Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent, Tezcatlipoca, the Smoldering Mirror, and Xiauhtlicutli, the Yellow Fire. Huitzilopochtli was one of the great gods who belonged to the universe's original creators. When Huitzilopochtli was born, he was at first only a skeleton without either flesh or face. Later, he was born once more as a fully grown warrior and became the god of the sun and war. It is claimed that the Aztecs lived for a long time in Aztlan, the White Land, at the place with the 7 caves. It was a fertile land where there was plenty of fish and various kinds of seabirds, birds with brightly colored feather garments, meadows with grass and flowers, and fields with corn, peppers, tomatoes, and beans. One day a man was out walking in the forest when he suddenly heard a bird calling persistently, "Tiwi, Tiwi, Tiwi." He stopped to listen, and then heard that the bird was calling in the language of the Aztecs. He realized that the bird was actually saying, "Let us go, let us go, let us go." "What does that mean?" he asked his people. And since no one could answer for certain, they went and asked their chieftain Tezcatlipoca. "It is a wise bird," said Tezcatlipoca. When they had told him what the bird had said, "Here we have enemies, and it is time for us to seek somewhere else. I have felt that this day would come, and I have only waited for a sign. This bird speaks the god's speech." So the Aztecs gathered and made a god image of their great god, the sun god Huitzilopochtli. Thereafter they placed the statue on a litter of reeds, and with the god held high in the lead, they wandered in a long column southward and let the god show them the way. But before they set off, Huitzilopochtli spoke to the priests and said, "The place you seek lies on the shore of a lake, far away from here. There you will see an eagle sitting on a cactus on a water-smoothed rock shelf. The eagle is holding a large snake with its claws. and the birds' outstretched wings spark in the light from the rising sun. There were 7 subject tribes that together formed a long caravan of Indians. Men, women, and children with all their animals and personal belongings. They came to a landscape that was very different from Aslan. The ground was hard and stony, and their feet were torn all the time by sharp thorns and thistles. Snakes and rats hid in the sparse grass, and the larger animals tried to prey on the weak in the caravan. The god Quetzalcoatl put the 7 tribes to the test during the long migration. He called to the chieftain Nanahuatzin and said, "Tomorrow there will be 2 bundles lying on the ground at the camp. One contains a bundle of sticks, and in the other there is a valuable gemstone. Let them decide for themselves which of the bundles they want to have. Then I shall determine which of them is wisest." The next morning, the 2 bundles lay there, exactly as the god had said, and the tribes began to argue over them. At first, everyone wanted the bundle with the gemstone, but then some of the most persistent Indians began to change their minds. The gemstone was certainly beautiful, but with the sticks one could make a fire, build windbreaks, or make walking sticks and arrows. They would surely have better use for them on their migration than a stone. However valuable it was. So the tribes divided into 2 camps. Some took the sticks, while others took the gemstone and went off in another direction. After many years of difficult wandering, the Aztec tribes reached the city of Tallinn. There they settled for a time and lived a calm and harmonious life. Many thought they had finally reached the end of their long migration, but Quetzalcoatl's priests knew that they had to continue. There were many who refused. They had settled into Tallinn, where their children had been born, and they knew of nothing else. Then Quetzalcoatl himself spoke to them and said, "Do as I say, and let me lead you. I shall transform myself into a white eagle. I am your god. I am the sun that gives life force, that warms you and lets you live. He who does not follow me and goes the way I show is no true Aztec. Go only as long as you can see me, and when I go down behind the horizon you must stop. Then you will see the sign, and there you shall erect a grand temple for me." The Aztecs listened with great respect and did exactly as he had said. They followed him when he flew before them, a white eagle that shimmered in the sunlight. Finally, the Aztecs came to the Valley of Mexico and the marshy lake Tezcatlipoca. There, among the reeds, they saw the sign they had been waiting for. An eagle stood on a cactus on a rock that had been hollowed out by the lake's waves. It held a writhing snake with its claws, and its wings were spread as if for flight. Again the god spoke to them. "From this place you shall conquer all corners of the earth and put all other people under you, for you are my people. And there is no sun god in the whole world who is greater than I. Through strength and suffering, you will get everything you wish for." Archaeologists believe that the Aztec migration in its entirety took nearly 300 years. The city they founded around the year 1320 was Tenochtitlan, which later became the capital of the Aztec Empire. When Cortés and his men arrived in 1519, they found a flourishing city built on an island in the lake. The access routes consisted of massive stone dikes, and the area between the stone dikes consisted of clay resting on woven willow mats, so that floating gardens with vegetables and flowers were formed. There were aqueducts for fresh water, and both the gardens and the city were crisscrossed by a network of canals. Inside the city walls were most of the houses made of stone, and lay grouped around squares and paved streets. In the large square was a lively market with a throng of loud-voiced merchants from all parts of the empire. The private residences were dominated by palaces in rose-colored stone, by temples to the various gods, but above all by the war god Quetzalcoatl's mighty temple pyramid, which rose a full 356 meters above the ground in the city center. Tenochtitlan was completely destroyed by the Spanish conquerors in 1521. After they had first besieged the city for a long time and then conquered building by building, thousands of Aztecs died of smallpox, and many of the survivors died of hunger. It is said that Cortés and his men in the final battle fought step by step up to the top of Quetzalcoatl's temple and struck down 400 Aztec warriors along the way, after which they burned the altars and destroyed the god images. The Spaniards were so upset by the fact that human sacrifices occurred in the temples that they leveled them to the ground. Today, Mexico City lies on almost the same spot where Tenochtitlan once stood. The Aztec symbol for the eagle and the snake that led them to their new home is still today Mexico's national symbol. The Squabble of the Sons. In the old days, it is said, there were two sons, an older and a younger. One day, old son said to young son, "Let us go and get some honey to eat." "I would like to have some honey," answered young son, "but I have a pain in my leg. I cannot climb up into the trees." "I can climb," said old son. "Will you give me a little honey then?" "Of course," said old son. "Why should I not do that?" The two sons went into the forest and soon found a tree where they understood there must be honey. "I will climb up and throw down a piece of the honeycomb to you," said old son, whereupon he climbed up the trunk and sat down on a branch next to the hole where the bees had their home. Soon he sat and crunched on the sweet honey. "Hey there, don't I get anything?" shouted young son from the foot of the tree. "Wait a moment. I shall soon give you some," said old son with a thick voice from the top. "Here, open your mouth." Young son stood and looked up with a gaping mouth, and old son threw down a large piece of honeycomb. But to young son's great disappointment, there was no honey left in it. All that remained was a sticky wax mass. Young son protested loudly, but old son said that he ate exactly the same thing. "Here, try this piece," he shouted, and threw down yet another wax lump. Young son became angry. "I will get you for that wax lump," he muttered to himself, and began to model small animals from the wax he then placed on the ground around the foot of the tree. One after another, the small animals came to life, and soon there was a whole herd of small rodents that went into the ground and ate of the tree's roots. Old son, who was busy with his honey, noticed nothing before the tree began to sway and creak. "What is happening?" said old son. With a great crack, the tree fell down to the ground. In that moment, old son disappeared from the earth, but in his place a herd of pigs appeared, which were the predecessors of all the wild and tame pigs that exist today. It is claimed that their meat is so juicy and tasty because of all the honey old son had eaten while he sat up in the tree. The Maya and their myths. Without a doubt, the greatest of all the ancient civilizations in Central America belonged to the Maya people. They began to settle in the area as early as around 2500 BC. Their culture flourished in 3 different areas south of the Valley of Mexico. In the current Guatemalan highlands, from the coastal plain south of Chiapas in Mexico, down to the western part of El Salvador, in the lowland forests of northern Guatemala and Belize, and on the Yucatan Peninsula. In ancient times, they were influenced by the Olmec culture on the Gulf of Mexico, and it was from there they derived their calendar and their script. Their most magnificent period, however, occurred between 300 and 900 AD. During this time, they were initially influenced by the Teotihuacan culture, which had its center in the large city 130 miles from there in the Valley of Mexico. When Teotihuacan perished around 600 AD, the Maya continued to develop in their own way. They built large cities with buildings of stone, many of which have now been excavated from the forest and restored. The carvings, paintings, and ornaments that have been preserved from this time show that the Maya craftsmen had a knowledge and a skill that far exceeded that of other contemporary cultures. Toward the end of the 900s, the Maya fell under Toltec rule. The Toltecs brought with them a different art and architecture, and also new gods, including the Feathered Serpent, whom the Aztecs would later call Quetzalcoatl, but whom the Maya called Kukulcan. When the Toltecs' power began to wane in the 1100s, the Mayans were divided into independent kingdoms or states, of which the strongest were those belonging to the Kaqchikel and Quiche Indians. When the Spaniards arrived, the Maya's greatness was already a thing of the past. But the Maya were not the first to be defeated. The various empires in central Mexico, with their riches in the form of gold and gemstones, stood higher on the invaders' list. The Maya's resistance developed into a kind of guerrilla war, and the Spaniards did not succeed in gaining a foothold in Yucatan until 1542. Missionary work also started later and was less successful among the Maya than among the Aztecs, and the indigenous religion and faith are significantly stronger in Maya areas than anywhere else in Central America. Even today, over 40 different Maya languages are spoken, and one can still meet Indians with the high, sloping forehead and the powerful facial features that are so characteristic of the old preserved Maya portraits. A large part of what we know about the Maya's faith is derived from 3 scripts, which were recorded by experts from different Maya tribes after the Spanish conquest. Chilambalams, from Yucatan, is a collection of books containing songs, prophecies, historical events, and details from various ceremonies. The Chronicle of the Quetzalcoatl Indians tells of the Quetzalcoatl Indians' incredible history, and the Popol Vuh, which is a compilation of legends and mythology from the Quech Indians. It was written down in the middle of the 16th century, but was not discovered and translated until 1701. The Maya people actually had a well-developed writing system, and no fewer than 20 handwritings or illustrated manuscripts from the time before the Spanish conquest have been found. But unlike the Aztec scripts, the translations that may have been made at the time of the conquest were lost or destroyed under the pretext that they were the work of the devil, and the efforts made in recent times to decipher the writing have not yet yielded any fully satisfactory results. It is very likely that they deal with astronomy, rituals, and ceremonies rather than legends and mythology. But according to certain inscriptions on stone monuments, real history was also recorded. Even if the Maya script has not been fully deciphered, one can decipher their mathematics and calendar systems. Like the Aztecs, they used a mathematical system based on the number 20, and with the help of this, they managed to perform very advanced astronomical calculations. Their calendar comprised 2 different periods, one of 260 days and one of 365 days. Each day had its own omens and associations, and each 20-day period served as a kind of horoscope, which predicted both individual fates and the outcome of state affairs. With the help of this calendar, one can accurately date the events recorded. The gods dominated the life of the Mayan people, but there are only a few stories about them, and many of them do not even have a name. The scientists who have studied the god images in the scripts simply name them with letters. God A, with his skull head, is presumably the god of death, who in Yucatan is called Yum Kimil. God G is presumably a sun god, God I, a water goddess, and so on and so forth. The highest god seems to have been named Itzamna. His spouse was named Ixchel, and we know that they referred to the feathered serpent as Kukulkan. Among the other gods that appear in the manuscripts are a sky god or star god, a maize god, a war god, and a god for travelers and trade. Furthermore, it is known that they also worship the gods of the elements and a large number of animal gods. Unlike the gods of the Aztecs, the Maya gods and spirits seem on the whole to have been kindly disposed toward humans, and even if sacrifice and blood vengeance were not unknown to the Maya people, they did not occur to any great extent. After death, the souls of humans came to the kingdom of the dead. But just as with the Aztecs, warriors and other special categories were allowed to come to a kind of paradise, which in this case was dominated by a large kapok tree that provided shade and eternal rest. What particularly surprised the Spanish missionaries were the similarities that seemed to exist between the religion of the Maya people and Christianity. In both religions, there were stories of the Great Flood, as well as baptism and rebirth. In both, confession and penance were practiced, and pilgrimages were made to holy places. The Maya people even used the cross as a holy symbol, but for them, it seems to have represented the 4 cardinal directions. The similarities were so striking that some Spaniards even claimed that the Apostle Thomas had visited the country hundreds of years earlier during one of his mission journeys. Much remains to be explored in the ancient Maya world, and one constantly comes across new discoveries that will surely increase our understanding of their way of life. For the descendants of the Maya people in Central America, the spirit world is very much alive, the world of myths and fables is never far away, even if it is now influenced by many different cultures and traditions. The first humans. Popol Vuh, or the Holy Book of Wisdom, is a long, complex record of the Maya people's myths. It was written down in the 16th century by a member of the Quiche tribe, a southern branch of the Maya people from the mountain regions that today make up Guatemala. The book's name literally means a collection of written sheets, and it contains a mixture of mythology, ancient legends, and stories with a historical background. It is only in recent times that scientists have succeeded in deciphering the Maya people's written language. Thus, the Popol Vuh was our primary source of information regarding the ancient Maya people's faith and customs. The following stories deal with the creation of the earth and the migrations made by the ancestors of the Quiche Indians, as well as their final settlement. There was a time when all was still, silent, and motionless, and the entire space was empty. There were no humans and no animals, no birds, fish, crabs, trees, stones, caves, ravines, grass, or forest. Only the great space and the sea, which lay lonely and still. There was no earth, no movement, and no sound. Nothing that broke the even horizon between heaven and sea. Above the surface of the sea, it was constant night, but far down in the depths lived Pepu and Gukumaz, the creator and the shaper, surrounded by light. As they were gods, it was completely natural that they pondered over the mysteries of life, and while they lay there under a canopy of blue and green feathers, they spoke of the heart of heaven, the great god who had three manifestations: Kekulha, Huracan, the lightning, Chipicaculha, the lightning strike, and Raxa Kakulha, the thunderbolt. Their thoughts stretched further and further, deeper and deeper, and they spoke of life and light, and they decided to transform the night into day so that the world up there would get to know the light. "Let there be light," they said, "and let the day dawn over the sea and the land we shall create. A human shall be the first to possess this land." It happened as they had commanded. The seas sank to their current level, and mountain ranges rose up from the depths and formed land. Along with the mountains came the cypresses and the pines, and rivers hurried down between the rocks to the plains below. All this was done by the Creator and the Shaper, with the help of the three gods who together were the heart of heaven. When the mountains and the trees were finished, the gods created the small forest animals, the guardians of the forests and the spirits of the mountains, the deer, the jaguars and hyenas, the birds and the snakes. The Creator and the Shaper spoke to all the animals so that they would find their places. The deer along the rivers, the cats among the thickets in the forests, the birds in the trees, and the snakes in holes on the stony mountain slopes. "Now proclaim who we are," said the Creator and the Shaper and the three gods who together were the heart of heaven. "Our greatness is worth nothing if there is no one who can worship us." But the animals could not do that. They could only scream, roar, or squeak, each according to their ability. "It is futile," said the gods. "These animals cannot even utter our names, let alone worship us." And therefore, the gods decided that the animals they had created should be of a lower rank, and that they should be hunted and killed to be eaten. Thereafter, the gods decided that they would create humans. "We must hurry," they said, "for soon it will be light, and we need someone who can worship us." First, the gods created humans from clay that they took from the seabed, but they soon noticed that the clay did not hold. The body became too soft and shapeless. The head fell over to one side. He could not turn his head to look back, and he had no strength in his arms and legs. He could admittedly talk, but it was not possible to understand what he said, and when they put him down in the water, his clay body dissolved and disappeared in the swirling currents. The Creator and the Shaper realized that this clay person would not serve their purpose, so they held a consultation with the other gods and asked for help from the Great Mother and the Great Father, two ancient goddesses who could see into the future. Together, they then created men and women from wood. These humans looked just like humans, but were stronger and more powerful. It did not take long before they began to reproduce and spread across the earth. But they still had no understanding and could not remember the Creator and the Shaper. They dragged themselves along with dragging steps and with their gaze fixed on the ground. When the gods discovered that the beings they had created were still of no use for them, they destroyed a large number of them by letting them drown in a great flood and simultaneously sending out 4 giant birds that attacked them. Even animals that lived among them began to harass them and accused the humans of having treated them poorly. Their pots and pans reproached them for not having shown greater respect for their kitchen utensils. Night and day you have beaten us with sticks and stones and let us burn in the fire. Now it is your turn to suffer. And with that, the stones from the hearth threw themselves at the wooden humans and hit them in the head. Many perished in their houses. Many others tried to flee. But it seemed as if the whole world had turned against them. When they tried to climb onto the rooftops to escape, the houses collapsed under them. The trees fled when the humans approached. The caves rolled large blocks of stone in front of their openings, so that there was nowhere to hide. Only a few managed to find shelter in the forest, and it was their descendants who became the monkeys, who constantly chatter without anyone understanding what they mean. Then the gods held a new consultation, and just before the dawn of the first day, they created the first humans, who received flesh of white and yellow corn, and arms and legs of corn dough. The gods gave them a special brew that made their blood and muscles strong. The first humans were men, who were given the names Balam-Quizé, Balam-Akab, Manukata, and Iquibalam. These 4 men were wise and kind-hearted, and they could see things that are hidden from humans today. The gods put them to the test. "Look around," they said to the 4 men. "Is the earth not beautiful? Look at the mountains and the valleys. Are they not wonderful? Is it not lovely to live, to be able to think, to be able to talk, and to be able to move freely?" The 4 men looked around and agreed that the earth was indeed beautiful. "You gave us the ability to move and our reason," they replied. "We can speak and understand. We can think and move. From this single place we can see everything, both far and near, as clearly as we see each other. Praised be the Creator, and praised be the Shaper." For a time the gods were very pleased with their humans, but then they began to grow worried, because the 4 men would see too much. To prevent this from happening, the heart of heaven clouded their vision so that they could no longer see clearly, but instead perceived the world as if through misty glass. And as the gods took away their clear sight, their knowledge and ability to perceive the hidden also disappeared, and what remained was only a dark memory of the mysteries of light. The gods were afraid that the 4 men would otherwise have been able to become gods themselves. The gods did indeed take knowledge away from humans, but in its place, they gave them another gift, namely sleep. And while the 4 men lay and slept, the gods gave the 4 beautiful women to marry. And so eventually humans spread across the earth. They lived in peace with each other. They all spoke the same language and worshipped the same gods, the Creator and the Shaper, the heart of heaven and the hearth of the earth. They prayed for children and for light, for the sun had not yet risen in the sky, and the earth was still dark and damp after the floods, and these humans had not yet learned to know fire. When a long time had passed, and there was still no sun to provide light and warmth, the 4 brothers set off to Talanzuiva, where the 7 caves and the 7 valleys lay. Here they learned to know the gods who were to be held sacred in all families, 1 god for each tribe. Balamquize's tribal god was named Tohil, and his first gift to humanity was fire. The brothers carefully carried the fire from there, and when the rain came and extinguished it, Tohil gave them a new spark by striking with his foot. The rumor of the fire spread quickly, and soon men from other tribes came to warm themselves and to take a burning torch home. But Tohil was cruel to them and demanded human sacrifice in exchange for the fire. But still, no sun appeared in the sky. The brothers fasted and kept watch for the morning star, as they knew they would see it before the first sunrise. Eventually, they gave up hope and realized they would never get to see the sun in their homeland. So they broke camp and moved on through many different lands until they finally came to the mountain Hakavits. While they offered incense at the foot of the mountain, they saw the morning star slowly rise over the mountain ridge. The sky became brighter and brighter, and finally, the large round sun itself appeared. The new sun was not like the sun we have today, but it was still warm enough to dry the damp earth and make it more pleasant to live on. Before the sun came, the land had been inhabited by large animals. Enormous tigers and jaguars and monster-like pythons and vipers. Now they were transformed, along with the old tribal gods, into stone, and their limbs became stiff like tree branches. The world became safer for humans to live in. Up there among the mountains, the ancestors of the Quiche Indians had finally found a place where they could live. The Man of Gold. There was another creation story among the Maya people that was first recorded in our own century. According to this story, there were once 4 gods. The earth was created, the ground teemed with plants and animals, and the sea was full of fish. The wind watched over everything and summoned various types of weather, all as needed. But something was missing. There were still no humans. "Let us create someone who can be grateful to us for all we have done," said one of the gods. The others thought this was a good idea, so they began to discuss what material they should use. First, they tried clay. They made a small clay person and drew a face on it. When it dried, it looked very well made, but when they put it in the water, the face dissolved and the whole body crumbled. Then they took a tree branch and began to carve a human. He was given arms and legs, fingers and toes. They carved a fine nose and mouth, and chiseled out eyes and ears. They were quite pleased with the result and performed the water test. He floated without issue. "We should see if he passes the fire test," said the first god. But the wood was dry and burned quickly. Soon nothing remained but a pile of ash from the wooden human. "We will try with gold," said the third god, and took a large gold nugget from his pocket. Once again, they shaped a human. They put him in water without him dissolving. They burned him in the fire. But when they took him out, he was only finer than before. "He is suitable," said the gods. "Now he can praise us." And they whispered a prayer of thanks into the gold man's ear. But nothing happened. The gold man remained silent and stared at them without seeing. One of the gods was named Flesh. He was a very withdrawn god and did not walk dressed in colorful robes like the others, but had gray, dull clothes. "Let us try with Flesh," he said, and before the others could even answer, he had taken out his knife and cut off the fingers on his left hand. The fingers jumped away as fast as they could and were transformed into the first humans. They never had to undergo either the fire or water test. There was no time. But soon there were several thousand of them, rushing here and there over the earth and investigating what there was to eat, which leaves that could protect them from the rain, and which animals were dangerous and which were harmless. One day, the finger humans caught sight of the gold man. They approached him cautiously in the hope that he would speak or move, or perhaps smile. They gave him food and water, but he remained motionless. Then the finger humans became a bit bolder and went forward and touched him, but he felt completely cold and dead and made them shiver. But he still seemed to have a certain significance to them, so when they moved on, they carried him with them and cared for him as if he were alive. Slowly, the gold man became warmer, and one day he had become so warm that he could utter the thanks that the 4 gods had once taught him. As soon as the gods heard this thanks, they woke up with a start and looked around. Then they discovered everything the finger humans had accomplished and were very pleased, not least that the gold man had spoken. "The gold man has turned out so well, and the finger humans have also done much good," they said. "The gold man and his descendants shall be rich, while the finger humans shall be poor. But the rich shall take hand of the poor, because the poor help the rich in their own way, and the poor must lead the speech of the gold humans before the face of truth. For such is our law. No rich person can come to heaven unless a poor person leads him there." The corn spirit. Once a long time ago, when humans still lived in peace and prosperity, the gods held a council to discuss the situation. Humans have it too good, they said. She has all the food she needs. There is meat, there is fruit, and above all, there is corn. She seems to believe she can live forever. Humans no longer offer sacrifices to us. We never hear any prayers or songs of praise. We could just as easily cease to exist. I have an idea, said one of the gods. Let us hide the corn spirit. If they can't find the corn, they will go hungry, and then they will realize that they need us, after all. The other gods thought this was a good suggestion, so they hid the corn spirit inside a large rock. And because the spirit was gone, the corn harvest failed across the whole land. Soon the marketplaces were empty, and the poor humans had to survive on wild herbs and berries. Many starved. Even the birds missed the seeds and began to peck in the gardens, so they began looking for the corn spirit. Finally, they found the large rock where the corn spirit was hidden, and they circled around, round and round, and attacked the rock to try to peck out the spirit. But the rock was far too hard for their weak beaks, so it didn't work at all. After a while, an ant came crawling. Now, I'm going to eat you up, said one of the birds. I am hungry. That would be stupid, said the ant, for I could do you a service. I can show you how you can get the corn spirit. How would that work? Said the bird. You are just a puny little ant, and we are birds with strong, hard beaks. If we can't make a hole in the rock, how could you do it? And so he began to sharpen his beak to be able to impale the ant. Tomorrow, you will be able to eat corn again, the ant replied calmly, and it would be very foolish of you to let a new corn supply slip through your fingers just for a puny little morsel like me. You must have patience. When I think about it, you are quite small, replied the bird. We will have to wait and see what happens tomorrow. It might be so. Perhaps we won't eat you after all. Perhaps it will be so. But only maybe. The next day, the birds gathered at the large rock again, and to their great surprise, they discovered that a large pile of corn lay beside it. The gods saw it too, and they hurried to spread the kernels before the birds could manage to eat them all. Plant these new kernels with care, and guard them well, they said to the humans. And above all, remember to show the gods a little more respect in the future. Every time you eat corn, you must think of us and show your gratitude. If you don't show us respect, the corn may disappear again, and next time it's not certain that it will come back. Thereafter, they turned to the ant. And how could you get into the rock? It was as easy as anything, replied the ant. When we came to the rock, it was night, and in the moonlight, we discovered full of holes and cracks that were not visible in the strong sunlight. Then it was just a matter of lugging out the corn, kernel by kernel, just as we do when we carry home food to our anthills. We are so many, so it went quite quickly. We never said you were allowed to do that, said the gods in anger. There was a reason why we hid the corn there, and now we had to change our plans because of you. Therefore, we will punish you, to teach you, once and for all, not to interfere in things that do not concern you. We will come and tie a thread around your waist and bind it to the anthill. In that way, you will never again be able to wander off in that manner. The gods did as they had said, but once again the ants managed to outsmart them. They managed to gnaw through the threads that held them trapped at the anthill and squeeze themselves down into thousands of holes and cracks in the ground. But not completely and entirely did they succeed in escaping the gods' wrath, for the thread remained tied tight around their waists, and it remains there to this day. Humans, for their part, were grateful to the small ants, and have ever since treated them with great respect. Even the birds think twice before they eat an ant. How the rabbit got his long ears. It was once a jaguar who was to marry a jaguar princess. One day when he was out and hopped, a rabbit came forward to him and said, I intend to marry that jaguar princess. Oh no, you are not at all, said the jaguar upset. You are just a stupid rabbit, but I am a very strong and handsome jaguar. We shall see, said the rabbit. The jaguar began to go his way, but the rabbit followed after him and continued to boast about how wise he was. After a while, the jaguar began to get irritated. It's not enough to just talk, he said grumpily. We will go to the princess so we can see who is strongest and who can be the best husband for her. "Excuse me," said the rabbit, "but do you have anything against me riding on your back? If you are now so strong? I'm starting to get a bit tired of walking." The jaguar thought that was good to hear, for he took it as a sign that the rabbit actually was quite weak, after all. "No, of course not," he said condescendingly. "Hop up, but let me for safety's sake put on you this saddle, so that I don't fall off," said the rabbit in passing, and pulled out a small saddle from his bundle. The jaguar gave a loud sigh, but let the rabbit have his way. After a while, the rabbit began to whine and cling to the jaguar's fur. Oh, he said. "I'm just slipping all the time. Do you mind if I put a bridle on you, so I can hold on to the reins?" The jaguar agreed to this, and secretly, he rejoiced at this further sign of the rabbit's weakness. "When you are as strong as I am, you don't need such things, but I guess you have to have it," he said. "It will be no trick for the princess to decide which of us is the strongest." But when the rabbit had also put on a pair of spurs that he dug into the jaguar's sides while shouting with his shrill voice, the jaguar was not quite as sure of himself anymore, and there was not much he could do about it, because as soon as he tried to shake off the rabbit, he got a painful jerk in the mouth from the bridle, and the spurs hacked him violently in the side. A hard whip on his bottoms made him understand that the rabbit had now also brought out a whip to be able to keep him under control. Reluctantly, the jaguar was forced to run all the way home to the princess, and then stop docilely when the rabbit commanded it. With a nimble jump, the rabbit swung himself down from the jaguar's back and sauntered up to the princess while beating back the high grass with his riding whip. The jaguar slinked dejectedly behind a tree. "You seem to be a rather clever fellow," said the jaguar princess, "significantly wiser than that rather stupid jaguar who wants to marry me." "In that case, why don't you marry me instead?" the rabbit asked nonchalantly. "Yes, of course," replied the jaguar princess and purred. "But there is just one thing that worries me. You are a bit small. I mean, compared to the jaguar. He is so strong and has such fine teeth. In that way, he is actually superior." "I understand what you mean," said the rabbit, "and I understand that you feel hesitant. But let's go to the creator and see if he can't do something about it." They had to search for several days before they finally found the creator sitting up on a high mountain. The creator listened attentively as the rabbit talked about wanting to become bigger and better, to be more worthy of the jaguar princess. After a long silence, the creator answered, "If you want to become bigger and better, you must find 3 large teeth for me," he said. "One from an iguana, one from a giant, and one from a monkey." The rabbit started with what was easiest and hurried off home to the monkey. There he pretended to be a traveling barber and offered to shave the monkey. When he was finished, he intentionally left his razor behind because he understood that the monkey would try to use it himself. And he was right, for already the next day the monkey began to shave. And it was not long before he had cut himself on the neck. With blood spurting, he ran forward to the door. Just then, the rabbit happened to come by. "Help me, rabbit," screamed the monkey. "Help, I'm dying here." "I shall help you, but only if you give me that loose tooth you have," answered the cunning rabbit. The desperate monkey agreed to that, and in that way, the rabbit got the first of the teeth he had to obtain. 2 remaining, thought the rabbit, and set off to look for a giant. Soon he ran into 2 giants who were walking along the road. They were arguing loudly with each other. The rabbit hopped up onto an embankment beside the path and threw a handful of stones at one giant. "Why are you throwing stones at me?" screamed the one giant to the other. "I haven't thrown any stones," replied the other. "Yes, you have," screamed the first. In the same moment, the rabbit threw a handful of stones at the other giant. "Now it's you who is throwing stones at me," said the other giant. And so they began to fight, and they aimed their blows with such force that soon both lay unconscious on the ground. The rabbit crept cautiously forward to one giant and peeked into his open mouth. And quite right, one of the giant's teeth had been knocked loose during the fight, so the rabbit quickly pulled out the giant's tooth and ran from the scene. The third tooth was easy to get hold of. Soon the rabbit caught sight of an iguana lying and sunning himself on a rock, and he went forward and asked if they couldn't play ball. The rabbit brought out a ball and threw it to the iguana, who caught it in his mouth and threw it back. When they had kept at it for a few minutes, the rabbit changed the ball for a round stone and threw it with all his might straight into the iguana's mouth so that one of his teeth was knocked out. Before the iguana even managed to grasp what had happened, the rabbit had snatched up the tooth and run from there. With a steady grip on the 3 teeth, the rabbit went back to the creator. "Aha," said the creator. "So you got hold of the 3 teeth after all. Well done. As a reward, you may keep them yourself so that you and all your brothers get long, strong teeth to eat with." "But it's not just big teeth I want," objected the rabbit. "I want to be a mighty rabbit, a giant rabbit." "Oh, I understand," said the creator and laughed a bit, whereupon he leaned forward and pulled strongly on the rabbit's ears. "Is that enough?" The rabbit's ears had now become long and floppy. He rubbed them proudly with his paws and scurried back to the jaguar princess. "Well, what do you think?" he said. "I am certainly not the biggest animal in the forest, but I have the most stately teeth. With them I can gnaw through whatever, and my ears are truly fantastic." The jaguar princess cast a glance at the little rabbit sitting there so proudly before her, and then she burst out laughing. "You truly look stately," she said, and gasped for air. "And I know that you are wise, but as a real man you truly don't suffice. I have, after all, a certain dignity, and people would simply laugh themselves to death when they see you. I think it's best that I marry the old jaguar after all." And so the jaguar princess married the jaguar, and they were very happy together. As for the rabbit, both he and his children and their children have had big teeth and long ears ever since then. The man who became the sun. There was once a man who was out and walking in the forest one warm afternoon. He became tired and decided to rest a while up among the branches in a high tree. He climbed up and settled himself comfortably among the leaves, and soon he was sleeping deeply. While he sat there and slept, evening came, and a band of robbers came and made camp for the night at the foot of the tree. They made a fire, roasted their meat, ate, and then it didn't take long before they too fell asleep. Their loud, satisfied snoring woke the man up in the tree, so he climbed down to see what the noise was from. He warmed his hands over the fire's glow and tasted cautiously some of the meat the robbers had left. It tasted good, so he took another bite, then one more, and soon he had eaten up everything. Then he looked around to see if there was anything more of interest, and discovered a chest that the robbers had stolen. He opened the lid, and there lay a whole lot of beautiful clothes of finest cotton with insets and embroidery in brilliant colors. The man tried one garment after another, turned and twisted in the firelight, held out his arms, and admired the beautiful colors, and rubbed the soft fabric against his face. All the time the robbers lay around the fire and snored contentedly. On the bottom of the chest, the man found a wonderful red cloak, which he swept lovingly over his shoulders. In the same moment, something remarkable happened. His feet began to move by themselves and performed intricate dance steps that he had never before been able to do. He danced faster and faster and became ever wilder and more in control. He somersaulted and twisted here and there, while all of the time screaming. One moment, he flew up in the air, to next moment, huddled together on the ground, before he again set off with both feet at once. One of the thieves woke from the noise and sleepily opened one eye, but closed it again. What a terrible dream, he thought. And then, is it really a dream? A man in brilliant red clothes who dances like one possessed around the fire? The thief opened only one eye, so that the shock wouldn't be too great. Now he saw it again. It was indeed a crazy man who danced around the fire, and he was dressed in a brilliant red cloak. The thief gave a piercing howl that made his companions wake up with a start. "It must be the mountain spirit," they whispered to each other. "He has come to kill us." And in wild panic, they got up and rushed into the forest. The dancing man didn't even notice them. He just continued to dance, ever further away from the fire, and continued among the trees until he came to the edge of a deep precipice that seemed to separate earth from heaven. Without hesitation, the man danced out over the edge, straight out into the endless darkness. But instead of disappearing into the void, for a moment, The dancing figure seemed to float in the air, whereupon he began to rise up towards space with the cloak flapping around his shoulders. Higher and higher he rose, until it could no longer be seen that it was a person with a red cloak, but instead looked like a brilliant red ring up in the night sky. While he rose, a radiant light began to spread around him, and the air became quite warm. The dancing man had become the sun. The Grapefruit Girl. There was once a king who chose a bride for his son. The girl was both beautiful and intelligent, but the son still did not like her. "I want to marry someone who is not born in the usual way," he said. "I want an enchanted woman from the plant kingdom." Everyone else thought this was very strange, but since the king was an understanding father, he did not want to force his son into something he didn't want to be part of. Instead, he waited to see what sort of girl the prince would choose. One day, when the prince walked through the forest, he met a very old man. The old man was none other than the creator himself, but the prince could of course not know that. "Where are you heading?" asked the creator. "I am going to look for a wife from the plant kingdom," answered the prince. "A woman who comes directly from nature." The creator searched through his hunting bag and then gave the prince 3 different objects: a stone, a cup with some water, and a thorn. "Take these," he said. "Then you will find what you seek. But be on your guard. There are evil people here in the neighborhood, and they will try to hinder you from finding your bride and do everything to harm you both." Thereafter, the creator disappeared into the forest, and the prince continued along the path while examining all the plants that lined the trail. Soon he came to a grapefruit tree that was full of mature fruits. Since he was warm and thirsty, he picked a grapefruit and divided it into 2 halves with his knife. "Give me water," it said. But the fruit was dry and hard inside and contained no juice. Then he took yet another fruit and divided it in the same way, but it was just as dry as the first. He reached up for a 3rd grapefruit and was just about to start cutting in it when, to his great surprise, it transformed into a woman. "Ah, that was exactly what I wished for," said the prince. "A woman from nature, and not an ordinary person who looks like everyone else." He took her kindly by the hand and continued his journey together with her. It didn't take long before they noticed that they were followed by a dangerous robber band. However much they hurried, and however many turns and detours they took through the forest, it seemed completely impossible to shake them off. The sound of footsteps and branches snapping behind them just came closer and closer. Finally, the prince remembered what the creator had said, and he took out the thorn that God had given him and threw it on the path behind him. When he turned around, he saw that it had transformed into a large thorny thicket that completely and entirely blocked the way. He could hear the pursuers' curses as they tried to make their way between the tangled branches. The prince and the grapefruit girl hurried further, but soon he heard the footsteps again, and he understood that the robbers had managed to get through the thorn bushes. This time, the prince threw out the stone that God had given him, and immediately a large mountain grew up behind them that was full of sharp cliffs and dangerous precipices. The sound of footsteps died away, and the prince and the grapefruit girl began to walk a little slower, as they were certain that the robbers would not be able to climb over the mountain and catch up to them. When it became night, they laid down to sleep on the ground under a high tree, and the next morning they set off again, hand in hand. But to their dismay, they soon got to hear the well-known rattling sounds behind them again. "It must be imagination," said the prince. "How could they have gotten over the mountain so quickly?" He stopped and listened, but there was no doubt about the matter. The robbers were after them again. "This is our last chance," said the prince, and took out the bowl of water he had so carefully carried with him the whole time. He poured out the water on the ground. The water spread further and further away. It drowned plants and trees as far as the eye could reach, and was transformed into a mighty ocean with high foaming breakers, which further out changed into calmer, friendly, lapping waves. The robbers disappeared into the high waves, and the prince and the grapefruit girl could finally feel safe. On one side, the new sea was bordered by the mountain that had grown up from the stone. And now that the robbers had disappeared, The prince and the grapefruit girl dared to climb up the mountain to see how far the sea stretched. They stood highest up on the mountain peak and looked out over the glittering water. It seemed endless. Far away in the distance, they could faintly discern the well-known mountains in the prince's own land. "Look," said the grapefruit girl suddenly. "Here is a spring. The water is so clear that I can mirror myself in it." She leaned forward and contemplated her mirror image in the water. The prince continued to stare out into the distance. Just then, a woman with a coarse and dark appearance came sneaking. When she saw the long, well-built prince, she immediately fell in love with him. Then she too walked forward to the spring and saw the grapefruit girl's mirror image in the water. "Oh, how beautiful I am," said the dark woman, and looked down into the spring, in the belief that it was her own face she saw. "You think you are beautiful," said the grapefruit girl unkindly, "but you truly have an ugly face." Then the ugly woman became angry and took out a long thorn from her skirt, which she stuck into the arm of the grapefruit girl, so that she was transformed into a little white dove. It circled around a few times and then disappeared out over the sea. The prince, who was fully occupied with planning how they should get home, neither saw nor heard anything, and when he turned around to explain it to the girl, he first did not notice that she looked different, but then he seemed hesitant. "How dark you have become in the face," he said. "Are you sure that you are the grapefruit girl I took from the tree?" "Yes, of course I am," replied the woman, who was a witch, and quickly uttered a magic spell that made him feel worse. "It's just that I have been out in the sun for too long here up on the mountain, and you gave me nothing to protect myself for the heat with." "Well, she got a bit sunburned when we were up on a mountain," explained the prince, "and so she is tired after the journey." When they came back to the palace, a little dove came flying over the palace. It fluttered around in the garden. "I want to have my prince. I want to have my prince," it cried sadly. Several of the garden workers heard her, and soon the prince himself got to hear talk of it. "Catch the dove and bring it to me," he commanded, and soon they came with the little white bird in a wooden cage. "I want to have my prince," cried the dove, but even though the prince asked again and again, it could say nothing more. Naturally, the prince never suspected that this was the real grapefruit girl, and even though he took well care of the little dove and always had it in his room, he did not understand what it was it tried to say to him. About at this point in time, a war broke out between the king's people and a neighboring tribe, and because the king had become quite old, he offered the prince to lead the army in his place. As soon as the prince had set off, the witch, who knew exactly who the little dove actually was, took the opportunity to get rid of her rival for all time. "Today I would actually like to have roasted dove for lunch," she said to the king. "That dove in the cage, which always makes such a terrible noise, would fit perfectly." The king had nothing against it, so he commanded his servants to slaughter the dove. They were just about to kill it, when to their great surprise it cried out, "Please, do not cut my body into pieces. Bury me in the garden instead." The terrified cook buried the little dove in secret in the garden, exactly as it had asked. Then he prepared another bird for the witch, which she greedily ate, believing that she was finally rid of the grapefruit girl. When the little dove was buried in the ground, it returned in a way to its natural element. For the grapefruit girl originated from the beginning from the plant kingdom. Down in the dark earth, she slowly began to send out roots that started to grow, and soon a slender, green shoot stuck up from the ground. It grew unusually fast and became a tall, beautiful grapefruit tree. When the prince came back from the war, the tree was already full of large, pale yellow fruits. Shortly after the prince had come home, the king turned a year older, and the prince asked him what he wanted to eat on his birthday. "Most of all, I would like to have a grapefruit from that beautiful tree that has grown up in the garden. I have always been grateful to you for going out to war in my place, and that tree has somehow come to mean quite a lot to me while you were away. Let me then pick a grapefruit for you," said the prince, who also felt a strange attraction to the tree. When he reached up to take one of the fruits, memories welled up inside him from the day he had found the grapefruit girl. He held the fruit carefully in his hand and whispered, "Give me water, in the same way as the first time. And in the same moment, his beautiful grapefruit girl stood again beside him and smiled with happiness at having become human again. The prince became overjoyed. Now he understood everything that had previously seemed so strange. The strange woman, the little talking dove, and he could not understand that he had allowed himself to be tricked for so long. Furiously, he ran away to look for the evil witch who had tried to kill his woman, but she was nowhere to be found. In the same moment, she had seen that the grapefruit girl came back unharmed. She had simply burned up with rage, and after that, she was never seen again. The prince and the grapefruit girl could finally marry, and they had a long and happy life together. The first domestic animals. There was once a young god who was treated very badly by his older brothers. The little god lived together with his mother, but his brothers had moved to their own house nearby, and the little god often went there to get something to eat. Or rather, he went there to watch while the brothers ate, for truth be told, it was not often that they invited him to anything edible, even if they ate properly themselves. At that time, there were still no domestic animals, and since the little god was too young to hunt, he often had to go hungry. One day when he came there, the brothers had just sat down to the table. They were eating meat. "Sit down over there," said one of the brothers to the little god, "and see if you like these." And then they began to throw bone remnants to him, exactly as if he were a dog. "Get going on the bones, good boy," they said, while they howled with laughter and thought they were very funny. The little god did not laugh, but instead gathered up the bones they threw to him and put them in a sack. "Thank you, my brothers. That was very kind," he said with a serious voice. When he came home, he showed the bones to his mother. "Do you know what I'm going to do?" he said. "I intend to put down these bones in the ground and see what grows up." "Dear child, you must have been hit in the head and gone crazy," said the mother worriedly. "Those bones are dead. The only thing that will happen with them is that they rot. Don't be so silly." But the little god did not bother about her, but planted the bones in the garden in neat rows, starting with the largest bones and finishing with the smallest. His mother decided to let him be. Then he would at least have something to do for a while. Every day, the little god went and inspected his garden, and on the third day, something began to stick up through the ground. Excitedly, he ran off to his mother. "Mama, the animals' backs are about to come up out of the ground," he said. "Don't be silly, boy," she replied and laughed at him. "It's just the rain that has washed away the top layer of soil where you planted the bones. It is parts of the bones you see." But she was wrong. Every day that the little god came to his garden, a little more of the animals was seen, and soon even his mother had to agree that there was something strange going on with the planted bones. One morning, the little god discovered a cattle herd walking and grazing where the largest bones had been planted. He ran into the house. "Mother, now there are cows out there, and other animals are on their way up through the ground. Sheep and goats and pigs, come so you can see." Among the first things they did was to slaughter a fine young bull to celebrate their prosperity with a really good steak. When they had eaten up all the meat, the mother determined that they should send some of the bones to the older brothers to see how they would react. They would probably become quite angry, she thought. In actual fact, the brothers became not only angry, but also worried. Where did he get such a large animal from? They wondered. These bones do not come from any ordinary herd. Shall he be allowed to become richer than us others? Subsequently, they became properly angry. What does he mean by sending the bones after his feast? He's just trying to make himself look important. Finally, they decided to find out where their little brother had hidden his animals. If they are in a fold or an enclosed pasture, we will scatter them. All we need to do is tear down the fence. They found the animals without much difficulty. They were walking and grazing contentedly on a large meadow, surrounded by a high wooden fence. The eldest brother turned to the next eldest and said, "Transform yourself into a woodpecker, brother, and peck holes in the fence so that it falls apart. Then the animals will fly away. And who knows, maybe we can lay claim to a few ourselves." The younger brother transformed himself into a woodpecker and began to peck at the fence with all his might. But the thing was that the fence was made of a very hard type of wood, and despite him pecking steadily for as long as he could, he barely managed to make marks in the wood. Finally, when his beak had become completely crooked and the fence stood just as steady as ever, he gave up. Then the eldest brother got a new idea. Let 4 of us transform ourselves into moles and dig our way in. If we start in each our corner. This plan succeeded somewhat better than the first, for the moles managed to undermine the 4 corner posts with their tunnels, and some of the animals took themselves out and fled into the forest. But before they managed to scatter all the animals, the little god heard the tramping from the animals' hooves and came running to see what was going on. The brothers, who were afraid to meet their little brother now that he had gained such remarkable power, ran away from there. The little god repaired the fence and put in corner posts that were even stronger than before. The little god never found the animals that had run away, and inside the forest, they became the wild animals that live there today. The cows became wild buffalo, the pigs became wild boar, and sheep and goats became deer. Those that remained in the enclosure, and who were more docile and obedient than their runaway cousins, were the predecessors of our present-day domestic livestock. The Wedding of the Sun. There was once a man who had a very beautiful daughter. All day she sat and worked at her loom, and every day she saw a young hunter come past her door when he was on his way to the forest. In the evening he returned, always carrying a deer over his shoulders. One day she stood and rinsed some corn she was going to cook, and when she was finished, she threw out the rinsing water on the path in front of her father's hut. The path became very slippery where she had thrown out the water, so when the young man came walking, he slipped and fell. He dropped the deer he was carrying, and the girl discovered that it was not a killed animal at all, but only a skin filled with glowing coals that crackled and smoked across the path. And the young man was no ordinary hunter, but the sun himself. Now he was ashamed of having been recognized, so he transformed himself into a hummingbird and flew away from there as fast as he could. But the sun could not forget the girl who had exposed his secret, and the next day he returned in his hummingbird form to eat nectar from the flowers in her garden. "Can you not catch that wonderful bird for me?" she asked her father. The father took aim with his blowgun and hit the little bird. Stunned, it fell to the ground. The girl carefully picked up the hummingbird in her hand, and then she held it to her breast all day. And when evening came, and the father locked her in the warmest and safest part of the hut, she took the bird with her. Inside the warmth of the room, the bird revived and caught sight of the girl lying and sleeping deeply by the fire. Then he transformed himself into a young man again and woke her. "It is I. Come, let's run away," he whispered. The girl recognized the young hunter immediately and became very happy. "I would gladly go with you, but my father has locked the door, and if we give ourselves away, he will follow after us and kill us." "No, he won't do that," replied the hunter, "for I can transform us. But he has a magical lens that comes to show him where we have gone," she countered. "Don't be worried. I'll take care of that," said the young hunter. In the next moment, they were transformed and took themselves out through the keyhole. Soon, they were far away from there. The next morning, the father discovered that his daughter had disappeared, and he understood immediately what had happened. "That was no ordinary hummingbird," he said. "Whatever it was, he has bewitched her." And he took his magical lens and held it up before his eyes to see where they had gone. But it was useless. The young hunter had poured chili powder on the lens, and the father's eyes stung and teared so that he could barely see anything at all. He rushed out of the house and shouted up to the volcano behind the village, "Volcano, volcano, stop my runaway daughter and the young man she has with her. Stop them and destroy them." Suddenly, a cascade of fire and sparks shot out from the volcano's center and hurled ragingly down toward the young couple where they ran. Just as the fire rain reached them, the hunter discovered a tortoise by the roadside. "Let me into your shell," he shouted. "How could I do that?" the tortoise answered crossly. "It is tight enough in here already." But the young hunter could transform himself, so he made himself very small and crept in under the shell next to the tortoise. He was just about to make the girl just as small, so that she also could creep in, when she was hit by the fire rain and dissolved into thousands of small pieces. The fire rain was followed by a flood, and when the young man finally could creep out from under the shell, he saw that the girl's body was scattered over a large lake. He commanded everyone in the vicinity to gather up the pieces and lay them in water in hundreds of water skins and bowls and vessels of all kinds. When all the vessels were full, he laid them in a sack that he took with him to an inn. He asked the host to store it and said that he would come back after 2 weeks. After a few days, the host saw to his horror that the sack moved, and when the young man came back, he asked what it contained. "It is no danger," said the young man. "Look." When he opened the sack, all the vessels and water bags and bowls and containers were full of small animals, and in a very small bowl, there was a little girl figure. When she caught sight of him, she waved and smiled happily toward him. The girl had become living again. Now it only remained to make her big again, and that the young man could easily achieve with the help of his magical powers. He returned to his original task, namely to be the sun, and when he shortly thereafter married the girl, she became his moon. Right, I think that's enough now, so that's where we will end tonight's episode of the Mythology series. According to my estimates, we now have only ancient Roman mythology and Norse mythology left before the next round of episodes. I sincerely hope you guys have enjoyed this series as much as I have during their creation. I think it's fascinating to learn of these different cultures' creation myths and fables. The most fascinating thing to me is the fact that there are so many similarities between fables from two opposite sides of the globe. Well, that's a discussion for another time. Let's wrap things up, and don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed your time here. And as always, I hope I see you all in the next one.